Okay, Tony, away you go.
Right, well, thank you for taking yourself away from this gorgeous weather to listen to this talk on these silver cups that, as you can see, were inscribed from the Mayor and Mayoress of Darwin, 1908. The Heritage Centre has some examples of these cups, and maybe you're fortunate and got one of the cups at home. In this talk, I want to just explore the background to these cups. Like the mayor at the time was George Pickapoulding. At this time, the term of the mayor ran from November 1907 to 1908. If anyone attended Holy Trinity School, like I did, I still think this is the proper Holy Trinity School and not the more modern building. You may remember coming out of the front door of the school and being faced by Banktop Mill. And this is the mill that George Pickapoulding ran. I've never seen a photograph of the mill until I started asking, and this is a photograph that Brian Hilton sent, and you can see the weaving sheds behind the mill. And it was George Pickapoulding who presented these cups and paid for them out of his own pocket. Although we refer to them as silver cups, they're just silver-plated cups. And they're important in the development of the infant welfare movement in Darwin. So if I can take you back to 1837, to the 1st of July, 1837, when civil registration for births, marriages, and deaths in England and Wales commenced. If you were around at the time, you would have seen notices like this in prominent buildings. You may be able to see, but it does say that births had to be registered within 6 weeks of them occurring. And this 42-day period is still relevant today. Each year, the Registrar General for England and Wales had to present a report to Parliament. And one of the features of the reports in the 19th century was showing that there was a high infant death rate. And you would have thought, as the country developed, as the wealth of the country increased, there would be less infant deaths. But one thing that was noticeable from the third half of the 19th century, although the birth rate declined, infant death rate increased. And in fact, in 1899 was the worst year in the 19th century for infant deaths. Infant mortality is supposed to be one of the indications that people in the 19th century used to look at the general health of a population. This is a book that I have, which I think has an interesting title: War is Good for Babies and Other Children. It goes back to the Second Boer War, 1899 to 1902, which showed that a large number of the recruits, roughly 2 out of every 5 men who came forward to fight when they had the medical, were found totally unfit for military duties. And a lot of these problems could be traced back to infant welfare. The government set up a committee to look at this problem and recommended medical inspections for children, free school meals for the very poor, and it's difficult to know what they meant by the very poor, and training on mother care, mothercraft. And we'll come back to that in one moment. This is a graph showing a 5-year average for infant deaths in Darwin. In the whole of England and Wales, about 200 babies out of every 1,000 births would never see their first birthday. 20% would never see their first birthday. Preston, for any large town in the whole of England and Wales, Preston often have the worst infant death rate. But when you look at Darwin, it's not much better. Between 16 to 19% of children born would never see their first birthday. And if you walk around any Victorian cemetery, it's easy to sort of have examples. This is an interesting gravestone in Darwin Cemetery, records the death of Jane, the wife of Lawrence Marsden Astin, who died aged 59, and Lawrence himself, who died a few years later, aged 72. And you might think, well, what has this got to do with this? But if you're interested in family history, you know that you've got to look at all of the gravestone. And if you go around the back, it will give you the horrendous story of the children. One or two of them died in infancy. And when you look at Jane and Lawrence, you find that they had a total of 10 children, but only 3 survived into adulthood. Like a lot of infants at this time would have died of what the Victorians called the filth diseases: measles, scarlet fever, whooping cough, etc. This gravestone, if you want to see it in Darwin Cemetery, is in section C. And this is another burial that took place in section C of Nancy Shorrock. She never saw her first birthday. You won't see her gravestone because she's buried in a common grave. Like if you look at our Victorian ancestors, the working day was extremely long, and you would need to have a good night's sleep. But how did you cope with all your crying babies? Well, one way would be to reach for Godfrey's cordial. If you look very carefully at the label, it says it may be habit forming. And if you look extremely carefully, you may be able to see why. It contained alcohol and opium. And several babies died of an overdose of Godfrey's cordial, including Nancy. She was 8 weeks of age, and her mother said that she was always a wheezy baby. And on the 20th of November, 1863, She was more wheezy and restless than other times. And she went to see her neighbour who had some stuff, which is almost certainly Godfrey's cordial. Her neighbour had a 3-year-old boy who had a dose of Godfrey's cordial, and whatever he was suffering from, it cured him. So Nancy's mother took the bottle home, gave her 8-week-old baby the dose intended for a 3-year-old, and of course, she overdosed and died. Now, maybe you couldn't afford to buy Godfrey's cordial, so another remedy was to go off to the chemist, buy a handful of poppy heads, and make your own brew of opium to give to your baby. This is the first burial ever to take place in Darwen Cemetery on the 2nd of June, 1861. Although technically it's not a baby, he managed to get to 18 months of age, but he died. And the cemetery people must have thought this was an important event, so they actually stuck the receipt for his burial in the burial register, which, as you can see, cost a total of 7 and 6pence. His mother couldn't afford this, a single parent, so the authorities for Darwen, the local board of health at the time, paid the 7 and 6pence. And you may wonder why he died. His death on his certificate, death certificate, was recorded as teething. In Victorian Britain, there was great social stigma attached to having a child out of marriage. And this is where baby farmers could come to your help. These people would advertise in quite important publications that they were a married couple with no family, and they would adopt a healthy child. They offered a nice country home, and the terms were £10. They didn't pay you £10, you paid them £10 to take the baby off your hands. So we're talking in the region of £1,000 to £8,000 today. And these people, these baby farmers, weren't very nice people. They didn't care for the baby. They would underfeed them, so the baby would die of starvation. But these women wanted to maximize their income, so they would then go to the local market and sell the baby clothes. And there was an outcry. I've never come across any baby farmers in Darwen or Blackburn, but as a result of this, various committees were established, various acts of parliament took place to look at infant welfare. Right, social conditions, housing would affect a baby's health. This is the 1851 census of Bolton Street, or as we know it now, Bolton Road. This is a block of buildings just opposite Belgrave Graveyard. So it's those just by Hartman's Way. The first time I did this talk, I would say it's like where Mark Graham had his hairdressing business, but as it's no longer there, you can't say it's his business, but you may know Smalley's Court. Now, when you look at this, it's a nice, clean image. But when you look, and I want you to look towards the bottom at Henry Halliwell, who's 85, a winder of silk, and his wife, Tabitha. In 1853, Darwin had an inspection to look at the sanitary conditions. And this is what it says about Henry Halliwell. Examined a cellar dwelling occupied by Henry Halliwell and wife, an old man and woman, with some fowls. Both people are upwards of 80 years of age, very filthy and wretched. A foul privy close by the door, stagnant pig filth, no drainage, no pavement. Houses in the yard have no privy except the filthy one under the steps near old Halliwell's house. And if we read a bit more of the report, it says that the drainage from the graveyard, so it's Belgrave Graveyard, was running across Belgrave Road down into the cellar of Henry Halliwell. Now you may think, well, things should have changed, but this is an image of one of the houses in Darwin in the late 1940s. And, you know, it always reminds me there's nothing like the good old days, is there? The way babies were fed also sort of was causing concern. The top left-hand illustration is this long-necked feeding bottle, a death trap. There's no way that anyone could get that properly cleaned. And even all those devices at the bottom will be difficult to get cleaned. And the medical officer of health for Darwin in 1906 included in his annual report the way that babies were fed. If you couldn't breastfeed them, then you could feed them with bread and water. Sometimes you could add a bit of milk. And it's important to think about how the milk is stored at home. And this is a cartoon from Punch, which illustrates the problem that some of the public health officials were faced at the time. You know, one woman saying to the other one, how can this young doctor tell us how to feed and look after the children? You know, I've already buried 14 of my own, so I know what I'm doing. Well, at the beginning of the 20th century, things were causing concern. And one of the important developments in infant welfare was at Huddersfield. In 1905, they managed to get a private Act of Parliament by which births that took place in Huddersfield had to be reported to the medical officer of health within 48 hours. They appointed 2 health visitors. So once they were notified of a birth, they could arrange a home visit within 10 days, give the mother advice on the good way of caring for a newborn baby. They established a milk bank where they could receive pure milk. Like a lot of the milk at this time was mixed with water which may not be clean or other things. They also developed an experimental day nursery. And all the reports will tell you that this scheme was very successful. Well, on the back of that, Parliament passed the Notification of Birth Act in 1907. This act could be adopted by any local authority if they wish to do so. If you adopted the act, then births had to be reported to the Medical Officer of Health within 36 hours. This could be done either by a letter, or the doctor who attended the birth or the midwife would give the parents a prepaid postcard that they could then dispatch off to the medical authorities. And as I've already said, this act could be adopted by a local authority if they wished. And Darwin adopted this act in February 1908 and appointed their first health visitor, Lucy Mabel Glass. And it was George Pickapoulding who, well, first of all, there was some reluctance of the medical profession to take part in this act, because they did say, we're doing all this extra work and not getting any payment for it. And George Pickapoulding must have thought that, well, a new woman coming knocking at the door, trying to get through, giving you advice on how to look after your baby, may be met with some reluctance. So what he said is, for every time the health visitor saw a child, a baby, the health visitor will give you a silver cup. And this is the type of silver cup you got. But once you got through the door, she gave you advice on baby feeding. If you had to use a bottle, then the correct way to use it, how to prepare the food, the amount to give at each feed, how to warm the food. Constipation seems to be a problem, because there are several examples where Miss Glass is giving advice on how to prevent constipation. What to do for baby's good health, the importance of fresh air, and do not use a dummy. Miss Glass established the Darwin's Mothers Club. This was held in the library every Saturday afternoon. And as some mothers were coming from a great distance, there was the opportunity to have some tea, bread and butter, and a cake for 1p. They had instructions on how to prepare for baby, how to knit vests for baby, how to care for them for the first month, how to cut out a baby's flannel, breastfeeding. Other sessions included ailments that baby may have, thrush, colds, diarrhea, and constipation again, how to wash baby, how to dress baby, and then another one, which I thought was a bit too near the knuckle, but why babies die. So that was a beginning of babies' welfare movement in Darwin. Although Miss Glass only remained with us for 1 year, she set in trend something that Darwin can be proud of. This is the British Journal of Nursing. And in a report, the end of January 1914, they were reporting on these welfare clinics. And some towns referred to them as schools for mothers. We got mothers' clubs, mothers' welcome. And the one thing I like about this report, it says, of the Darwin's Mothers Club, it's an extremely good example. It's a committee, it's a group that's run by a committee of ladies, which, like at the time, you would have some men muscling in, but Darwin was entirely managed by women. Like this is an example of one of the cups, possibly between February 1918 and when George Pickabaldin's term of office ended, there were possibly between 600 and 700 cups issued. Some parents were very proud of getting a cup and would engrave it with the child's name. And this is a cup that appeared on Darwin Bygone's Facebook page. It was presented to Henry Lomax and his wife, Mary Ellen. And they must have been very proud that their daughter receiving a cup born on the 7th of May, 1908. But Mary didn't live all that long, less than 1 year. In fact, when you look at this family, there was 8 other siblings at the time that Mary was born that already had lost their life. But this Early Notification Act that Darwin, in its wisdom, adopted in 1908, the government then realized that it was of benefit. So they passed an extension to the Act in 1915 that made it a requirement for all local authorities to adopt it. There was no question of getting out of adopting it. So this, although the talk is quite short, it's an important development in the history of Darwin, in the history of child welfare. So I hope you have found it informative. Like as we say, the talk's free, but if you want to make a contribution to the running of the Heritage Centre, then please do so. The centre is always looking for volunteers. And of course, you don't need to have an in-depth knowledge on the history of Darwin. There's lots of things that volunteers can do in terms of looking after the building, IT work, fundraising, and of course, we're always looking for donations. So I will stop, and if you want to ask any questions, then please do so. But thank you for listening.
Okay, everybody, if you would like to unmute yourself, and then you can ask Tony any questions. We are still recording, by the way. Anne, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Will do, yeah. Thank you, Tony. That was very interesting.
Right.
Can you find me?
Yeah.
What do you think my skill could be to help you out?
Well, what are you good at?
You know, transcribing, but otherwise I don't know.
Well, I think what would be useful once we're open, like at the moment, like the government we've gone through this, Freedom Day, which, but if you look at the number of new cases occurring in Blackburn and Darwen and the number of admissions, we've decided it's best to wait until the beginning of August. So I think the best thing, Anne, is if you keep looking at our Facebook page or website, and once we're open, come along and see, and then we'll lock the door. You have got to sign up before you can go home. But yeah, I think the best thing is to come in and just have a talk to the volunteers. Like
John.
there's John, but also there's Anne Hull is one of the trustees. It's a very friendly place. So yeah, come along and meet everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tony. I was particularly interested because my mother was born in Darwen in 1905, so I almost half thought before we heard the dates, I thought, why have I never heard of these silver cups before? She was born.
Yeah.
She was born 3 years too early. And I'm not sure when her and her little brother was born. He was about 5 years later, so he just missed out on it as well. But
Yeah, like it took it, although Darwen adopted the Act in February 1908, Miss Glass wasn't imposed immediately, and people were complaining that, oh, I'm going to miss out on the cup. And George Pickup Holding had to reassure everyone that even if you had a child before the health visitor was appointed and you still let her through the door, when she does come, you will get a cup. But it's just for that period, February to November 1908.
yeah. And why did none of the mayors after that carry on giving them? Because the system already
Well, George
I
Pickup Holding
can
paid.
understand.
He paid for them out of his own pocket.
I gather that.
I don't know. Maybe because it had proved to be a success and no one felt uncomfortable or reluctant to allowing the health visitor to come through the door. Maybe they just thought, well, this is a normal way of things, and this person will be knocking and coming. But maybe if you had a child born that should have been due in November 1908, but was a bit late in arriving, you might felt a bit peeved by not getting a cup.
No, when I first heard the title of it, I scurried back to hear when my great-grandfather, have I got the number of greats right, was mayor of Darwen, but it was not, because I thought, oh, is that going to be something to do with him? But Thomas Duxbury, who you must know about, with all Duxbury, but he was 1920. So I now know he didn't give any silver cups. It was just that 1 year.
Yes, yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. It's Jean Ramsbottom.
Hi.
I'm new to all this, but I have one of these silver cups. It was my mother. Pardon?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, it was my mother's, Mrs. Doris Anderson, who used to be the senior mistress at Springbank.
Oh, I know. I went to Springbank, and John East did as well. So we know Mrs. Anderson. Yeah.
She taught me all that poetry I ever knew, Mr. Anderson. I am so grateful for her.
And also the mill that you were talking about, across the road from the school.
Yeah.
We used to go in there because we lived on Punstock Road then, which isn't far away.
No,
and
no.
We used to nip down over the cinders and things down to school. And all the mothers of the other children that we were friendly with on that road, they all worked in that mill. So straight after school, you send it across the road, see what goodies they had in the handbags.
You'll have to come over and see us. I still have a report from my school about Mrs. Anderson, who wrote in my English report. His handwriting could improve immensely, but his teaching is immensely advanced. I think everybody will probably agree with that. However, you must come over and see us. And while I'm talking, Tony, only today I was meeting people in the cemetery, and they were saying to us, why is the old cemetery full of areas where there's no graves and there's just one or an odd two? And I said to them, if you want to log on to the Heritage Centre and to the website for the Darwin Cemetery, you'll see that there are thousands of graves there for children that were either born, as Tony's been talking about, or stillborn. And there are still mothers in their 60s and 70s and 80s still coming up to Darwin Cemetery looking for their stillborn baby burial plot. And it's quite interesting that as we move away from that medical side, the way that we treated stillborn children is still a bit of an enigma, and probably history will be something that we can be ashamed of. But thank goodness we've now improved that sort of work that we deal with stillborn children.
But if you look at stillborn babies, it was only until the middle of the 1920s that they were registered. Like if you look at the burial register for Darwin Cemetery that I've seen in the 19th century, it just says stillborn. Doesn't give a name or anything, doesn't give parents' names. You just have a plot number.
I've just been able to dig out an interesting piece of paper, Tony. It's a printout of the 1891 census, on which my great-grandmother and great-grandfather appear. My great-grandmother, whose married name was Ellen Killenbeck, I don't know what her maiden name is, out doing some more digging. She was born in 1850. And I have a photograph which looks to be about dated 1900, when many of the kids listed on this census appear on the photograph, and there were 10 kids. So she was born in Darwin, but moved out with her husband, who was born in Blackburn, and lived in Downham Road, Chatburn. So it was a different sort of non-urban environment, I guess. Yeah. But they were, their occupation, they were classed as weavers, so they must have been in one of the weaving sheds up near Clitheroe. But it's interesting to see that 10 kids survived, in contrast with the numbers that you read out today.
Yes, yeah.
I think the other thing I'm proud of is that I do have a direct connection with Darwin, which I didn't know about until 2 weeks ago when I dug out this document.
Good. Like if you're looking for, did you say you've not found a marriage?
I didn't know her married name. No, the only other document I've got, without having delved into it at all deeply, is my grandfather's birth certificate, signed by his mum Ellen Killenbeck, but not signed by name. It's X, her mum.
Oh yeah, yeah.
She must have been illiterate to the extent of not being able to write her own name.
Well, if you want to try and find a marriage, the best website to use is Lancashire BMD. It's www.lancashirebmd.org.uk.
Right, interesting. I haven't been on a mission to sort of find out about my antecedents. Yeah. It's just during the lockdown, where can we go? It's a nice day. And I recall that when I was a kid, we used to take my granddad in my dad's car to visit the area where he grew up, which was out in Chatburn.
Right. But that Lancashire BMD's website is free to use,
Right,
Uh,
I'll look at that. Good.
and it will give you the name and address of the registry office if you do want to apply for the marriage certificate.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
I'll have to-
it's a good site to use, and someone's already sort of nodded to say that.
I don't know why my face is not coming up on the screen, because I am sat in front of the camera on my laptop. I can switch the mic on and off, but I don't know why my picture's not there.
Well, there should be an icon similar to a video camera
You're
with
not,
a
you're
line
not,
through.
yeah, you're not missing anything, so I shouldn't fret about
Oh,
it.
right. Oh, so yeah, right. Okay.
Tony,
Are there any?
Yes.
Are there any? Oh, sorry, Anne. I was going to say. I was going to ask if there's any more questions.
Yeah. Am I right, John?
Yeah. Go on, Anne.
Tony, that was really good. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And as
Thank you.
usual, excellent research.
Thank
I
you.
wouldn't have
Thank you.
expected anything less. I just wonder if it's worth mentioning that George Pickup Holden built Whitehall Hotel, as you well know, of course, as his home, 1898, I think.
Yeah.
Might
Yeah,
be of
it-
interest.
If you want to see sort of maybe why he could afford to give his silver cups away, the amount of money you could make from a cotton mill in Darwin. If you do have a visit to Darwin and see Whitehall Country Club, or as it was in his day, it was it Springbank?
Mm.
Springbank
Yeah.
House.
Yeah. There was a bit of money flowing around in Darwin at
was.
one time.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to mention everybody that I thought Tony might have that the grave that he mentioned, the first burial, was unidentified until the Friends of Darwin Cemetery took up a little bit more initiative. That's been going for 10 years, and our beloved presenter tonight is our chairman of the Friends of Darwin Cemetery. And when it was the 150th anniversary, the cemetery was opened up in 1861. So when it was 150 years old, we actually put a memorial to the first burial. So if anybody's up there, it's quite significant. It's right at the edge of the cemetery. And I know that one or two of the friends do care for it and put little teddy bears on things like that. So that first burial's not been forgotten, and that's really significant when it comes to our history, as well as everything else that's in our cemetery. And the talk Tony's talking about, it means that these were real people that had tremendous and tragic end, and it's really nice to remember where we came from. And so I don't know if there's any other questions.
Well, John, just before you finish, as you mentioned the grave, if anyone does visit and see the grave for this first burial, then close by is a grave for a Belgian refugee who came to Darwin in World War I and passed away in 1919. And then again, just slightly further away in another direction is the grave of George Pickup Holden. Oh, Ian's appeared. Hooray!
Just to, Ian,
I found the icon at the left. I've got exceptionally long hair at the moment. I was hoping to get a part in a movie as a peasant, and they wanted long hair.
Well, nice to see your face, Ian, and thank you for your contribution. Are there any other questions? Because we are still recording, but I was going to say, so I'm, as a fellow trustee of the Heritage Centre and passionate about the heritage of Darwin, whether it be the cemetery and everything else, what a gem we have in a chairman and a historian that can give us such accurate and well-presented history of our town. What better things can we learn about ourselves into the future? So can I, on your behalf, everybody, give Tony a big thank you for that presentation. and make sure that we acknowledge his skill and his knowledge. And I know where I want to go if I ever want to ask him a question about the ancestors, but you do now. So to reiterate, thank you, Tony, and
Okay,
Anne
thank you,
and
John.
everybody else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
To
you.
come and help us at the Heritage Centre, you've only got to ask, because we're a good bunch and we are always welcome for different skilled people. And Anne, you're more than welcome. I'll trip you up at church anyway.
Thank you.
So is there anything else? Does anybody else like to, well done, round of applause.
Thank you, thank you.
To the Heritage Centre. Hello, daughter in Germany. He did well, didn't he do well?
He did excellent, yeah.
No, you should be very proud of him. And 4478, thank you for joining us and everybody else here. It's been a delight having you, and we'll look out for our next presentation.
Definitely.
Daphne, are you okay?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, and
Oh,
thank you, Tony.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, 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 bye.
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 Bye.